When it comes to Pete Hegseth, number one, this is a man who is the living embodiment of the antithesis of wokeness. This guy is not someone who got to where he is because he checked boxes or because he filled some kind of diversity quota or anything like that. No, he got to where he is because he was a war fighter, because of the way that he committed himself. He's someone who committed himself to excellence in every one of those positions. I would love to see that right in the middle of his speech, right in the middle of that inauguration speech, I would love to see him turn while he's on the dais, right? Turn while he's right on the balcony and start addressing the people in the balcony, addressing the politicians, addressing the leaders and saying, you know something? This is a change of power, but the power is not being given to me. The power is being taken away from you and given back to the American people.
Joining me once again is the senior editor of Human Events, veteran Navy intelligence officer, and New York Times best-selling author, Jack Posobiec. Jack, happy to have you back. Welcome.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on again.
Now, everybody's focused on the inauguration. All are historic, but this one feels different because comparing it to 2020, right? In 2020, Joe Biden was installed, and rarely, if ever, has a nation ever delivered itself following such an obviously corrupt and difficult election. Yet here we are, so that's one of the main reasons. But the confirmation process for President Trump's cabinet picks has already begun. So I want to begin with Pete Hegseth's hearing that was today. There was no shortage of viral moments. Give us your initial reaction to how that played out.
Well, look, it was incredible to see Pete go up there and do that. Again, thanks so much for having me on and for taking the time to do this. And I certainly see here in just a short order, we are going to see something really new come up in American politics and American jurisprudence, because what's going to happen is you're going to see the exact promise already be kept by President Trump prior to him even taking office. And he did that through these nominees. So you've got people that he's put up across the wide breadth of these nominees. They're saying, wait a minute. And Pete Hegseth, of course, makes mention of this at one point. He said, look, I understand I don't have the normal resume of a Secretary of Defense nominee. I may not look like the Secretary of Defense nominees that you've seen before. Obviously, he's much younger than most of the Secretaries of Defense. And in fact, many of Trump's nominees, including his own vice president, are younger. I think JD is just 40 years old. And so what you're seeing is President Trump saying, I want to find people who are able to actually deliver on the change that we promised on the campaign trail. That's what the American people voted for. So he's not going looking around doing this sort of DEI kind of mentality of, okay, we need one of these and we need one of those and we need someone who looks like this and looks like that. No. He's saying, who can I get in there that's actually going to deliver? Remember, this was the whole, plot of The Apprentice and all of these other things that he's done before, like a businessman, to saying, all right, I've got a big project. I need to appoint some deputies. I need to bring in some people, some vice presidents. I need to bring in some secretaries, some directors. All right, I need all of those. And he's put together this team, not because they fit any political box or any made for media type box, but what he's done is he's put together a team that he believes can deliver on the promises that he made on the campaign trail, even if they don't look or sound exactly like what the country is used to seeing. And guess what? I think that's what people voted for. This was decided at the ballot box. And so when Pete Hegseth goes up there and says, yeah, you're right. I never was a general. I never was someone who ran the Secretary of Defense before. I wasn't an assistant Secretary of Defense. I'm an outsider. And what he's really done is put together this team of outsiders who, like himself, in many cases, like Pete, of course, who have experience within the ranks of the military, of having actually gotten his boots dusty, having actually deployed to combat, but now coming around and saying, look, I'm going to be working with people who understand the management, but my job is to deliver on the agenda and the strategic directives. And that's what you're going to see, I predict, as a theme that runs across all of the nominees, be it Pete Hegseth, be it Tulsi Gabbard, who they're, of course, are holding up, be it RFK Jr., be it Russ Vought, and so many others.
Yeah, I actually want to talk about that a little bit, because I'm a bit surprised that it was Hegseth who they decided to direct all of their fire out of all of the appointees. Now, obviously, you mentioned Tulsi, RFK. There'll certainly be some resistance within the media, but leading up to it, I mean, RFK seemed to be someone that they would easily direct their fire at due to his vaccine stance. Tulsi, we all know how they feel about her. But shortly after President Trump's win, we heard they might aim at Matt Gaetz, which I guess they did to an extent, though he removed himself from the process. So I really thought that, I should say I was surprised that it was Hegseth who really took on the brunt of it. And I do wonder, and I want to hear what you think about this, but I wonder if part of the reason for their attacks on Hegseth was due to his, unabashed Christian faith, that tattoo that we just saw on some of the pamphlets for the Carter funeral. So obviously that was debunked in live time. But what do you believe the reason is for the coordinated attacks being so centered at Hegseth?
Well, look, when you really do have to think and dig deep here, because what we do see in a lot of these threads when it comes to Pete Hegseth, it's that he stands up. Number one, this is a man who is the living embodiment of the antithesis of wokeness. This guy is not someone who got to where he is because he checked boxes or because he filled some kind of diversity quota or anything like that. No, he got to where he is because he was a war fighter, because of the way that he committed himself, whether under pressure, whether under fire, whether on the battlefield and off. He's someone who committed himself to excellence in every one of those positions. And he's made mistakes, and he'll be the first one to tell you so, by the way. And of course, people try to bring up his personal life, bring up his children, and this, that, and the other. By the way, if these senators want to talk about their personal lives, I'm more than happy to go there, because let's just say that, people who live in glass houses, DC is a big city, but it's a small town, if you know what I'm talking about. And everybody talks senators. So when it really comes down to it, is Pete Hegseth does kind of represent a modern throwback. And when I call him a modern throwback, it's because this is the type of guy who won World War II. This is the type of guy who would have been a doughboy during the 1939, 1930s, 1941, after Pearl Harbor. These were the type of guys that joined the military, that won our wars. These were the type of guys who responded to Hurricane Katrina when we had to send the military there. And he is literally the guy who responded in the war on terror after 9/11. Those are the types of people that America used to celebrate. Those are the types of people that America used to uphold. We used to name bridges after them and roads. And when someone, fell in combat, God forbid, we would honor them. We would honor their family. But somewhere along the line, when DEI took over, and wrote a whole book about how that took place and how it's reminiscent of things that happened in other countries around the world throughout history, that essentially these guys, the Pete Hegseths of the world, became the enemy, and they became the root cause, or they were blamed for all the ills of society. And look, I'm a guy I've got two little boys. I've got a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and they've never done anything to anybody, but they're growing up in a world that seems to be controlled by this vision of reality, where because they're white and because of their gender, which by the way is a gender assigned at birth, not a, by the way, it's not assigned at birth even. It's a gender that they're given by God at birth. The doctor doesn't do that. The Almighty does that, because, you get what you get. It's up to God. There's no way that you can change that. And by the way, you can ask either of them, and they both know that. But point being is, they're demonized just because of their immutable characteristics. And I talked to my wife about this, who, she grew up in the Soviet Union. She came to America because she thought she was coming to a place of freedom. And she said, I want my family to know freedom and live in that country. And she sees all of these things and she says, wait a minute, something is going wrong, because this isn't the America that I thought I was coming to.
Yeah, and I think Pete really conducted himself terrific today. I mean, you had all these Karen-esque Democrat senators screeching at him, trying to shame him about his past. And as you mentioned, they all have quite a past themselves. So I thought he did well, and I think the good news is he's more than likely to definitely get confirmed. But before that happens, I do want to shift to the first 100 days. It's an artificial barrier, of course. Even incoming Chief of Staff Susie Wiles has said that they're more focused on the overall as opposed to the first 100 days, but it is somewhat relevant nonetheless. So what are you hoping for and expecting in the first 100 days of Trump term 2?
Well, look, I've said, a number of times now, I'll say here again, that I would love to see that right in the middle of his speech, right in the middle of that inauguration speech, I'll be there. We're going to be covering it live. We're being on the ground. And I would love to see him turn while he's on the dais, right? Turn while he's right on the balcony, and actually turn around. And instead of addressing the world and addressing the people, just turn around and start addressing the people in the balcony, addressing the politicians, addressing the leaders, and saying, something, this is a change of power. But the power is not being given to me. The power is being taken away from you and given back to the American people. And it's going to be done so in a way that hasn't been done in this country for a long, long time. And then right after he does that, he can dress them down like I would dress down one of my sailors in the Navy. Then you have Stephen Miller there, who supposedly has something like 100 different either executive orders or rule changes or actions that he's been a little cagey about it. You know, Stephen's that kind of guy, but he was talking about it the other night to Hannity and says that they have 100 of these. Just bring them right up there on the podium and start signing them. Just start signing the executive orders right in front of their faces. And there's nothing that they can do about it and say, boom, border is shut. Boom, deportations have begun. Tom Homan, get to work. And Tom will already be in there in Chicago and say, yes, sir, Mr. President. And he gets to work on the cartels and the Venezuelans and Tren de Aragua and all that going throughout Chicago, where he said he's going to be starting this. And then boom, all you guys up in Anwar, all you guys up in Alaska, get to work, ban those rigs, get those drills in the ground. I want to see all of it. And by the way, I would love for it to be live streamed so we could see the border, we could see Anwar, we could see the drilling, we could see Alaska, we could see the deportation, see all of it going on in rapid fire succession. I'm not talking about the first 100 days. I'm talking about the first 100 minutes so that everyone understands there's a new sheriff in town. And by the way, that includes legality. So that includes the pardons for the J6ers and the investigations that are open up against the criminals who conducted themselves in halls of government prior to that. I mean, when I hear these stories and people say, what about, are you doing revenge? Are you on a revenge tour? I say, well, no, it's not about revenge. It's about justice. It's about balancing the scales and getting actual justice for the injustices that have been done to the American people, particularly the Gen Sixers and the pro-lifers and people who are involved in Bitcoin and crypto and some of this nonsense like Russ Ulbricht and others who were just, doing stuff online and the government decided to crack down on them. And I think when it comes down to it, I'll take an example of someone like a Liz Cheney, who we find suborned perjury in the case of Cassidy Hutchinson, had her change her testimony to include lies under oath to the J6 committee. Well, my friend Steve Bannon had to spend 4 months in jail in a federal penitentiary because he wouldn't even go to the committee because they claimed that he denied the subpoena. Well, she lied under oath. Well, so what does Cassidy Hutchinson have to do, or Liz Cheney, who suborned the perjury, have to actually do? They just walk away and they delete all the files, they delete all the evidence, they just get to walk away? That doesn't sit right with me. I believe that there is a debt that needs to be paid and the debts will be collected. And it's as simple as that. No, it's not revenge. It's justice.
Yeah, and they weaponize the revenge. They try to get ahead of the issue by saying if he does anything to hold people accountable, it's revenge. But the way you neutralize that argument, in my opinion, is say President Trump did what any normal person would do after what he endured and said, I'm not running for president in 2024. And we had a different Republican president or any president coming into office. I think and I think you would agree with this, you would still want to see that accountability for people who acted out. So you almost have to distance Trump from any of this retribution accountability. He has an obligation as president to shed light on these things. And that's why your mention of him turning and talking to these politicians behind him, his first inauguration speech, he directed his ire at them, but he didn't quite turn. So maybe we'll get that this year. But it's quite different from retribution when it's holding people accountable who have done such tremendous damage to the country, as you mentioned. So I want to shift a little bit to campaign promises. They're all important, but some are easier than others. For example, I think it'll be relatively easy for President Trump to seal the border, begin mass deportations, begin drilling for oil. They're important, but all things considered, they're relatively easy. The more difficult task will be tackling the more sinister schemes, many of which you just described, that take place behind the scenes in our government. What does draining the swamp look like to you, and how can the president accomplish doing that?
Look, I mean, there's a couple of things that President Trump can do. Number one, it certainly has to do with Schedule F. This is an example. It's a legislative term in a sense. Well, really an executive order where there's the issue with the deep state right now is that it's almost impossible to fire civil servants in the United States because they have all of these protections that were put in place by previous presidents. Well, guess what? The president of the United States is the head of the executive branch, and he does need to assert that authority, or else you're going to get more of these Vindmans, you're going to get more of these Chamarellas, you're going to get more of these people that run around, H.R. McMaster, these types who decide that it's their job to decide what U.S. policy should be, and they need to, quote unquote, protect the United States from the commander in chief. No, I'm sorry, there's only one duly elected commander in chief. His name is Donald Trump. His name is on the ballot, and no one else's was. That's the way the system works. So Schedule F essentially means that he could fire civil servants directly and without cause, because that with cause, of course, certainly, but in a sense, but not. He doesn't have to go through the process the way that they would have to before. That's number one. Number two, there's so many things you can do in terms of, did you know, for example, 80% of the federal workforce doesn't actually come into their office anymore. So you got to set that up right away. Say, no, you have to come into office. And I would add on top of that, by the way, that after they come to office, that every morning when they arrive at office, like when I was in the intelligence community, we didn't have to do this, but I would have loved to, is when you show up in your office, you all have to get together and in public stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. It only takes a minute. It's not a waste of time. Just stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance, and we're going to make sure that everyone does so. And I mean, you would clean up so many of the problems right there, but it also comes down to his basic understanding of finding out whether or not people are there. And look, if people are there just to do their job, if they're there to follow the edicts of the president, he's the one who sets the policy. If they're willing to do that, you got no problem with me whatsoever. But they've already begun discussing this, and the AP had a report last night talking about these holdovers at the NSC. They say, well, wait a minute, we're nonpartisan, but we've been appointed to the National Security Council by Joe Biden, and so we're going to be serving there. And so the incoming team, the transition team, has gone around and started asking them. The AP, of course, calls this a loyalty test. They say, are you giving them a loyalty test about who's loyal to Donald Trump? No, it's not a loyalty test. It's an understanding of will you and are you willing, physically and mentally capable and able. It's like when you're in the exit line at the exit row in one of those airplanes. Are you willing and able to assist? Are you willing and able to assist? So are you willing and able to assist in the implementation of President Trump's agenda? And would you believe it? There are people who are actually saying that they have a problem with that. And the people who have a problem with that, according to the Associated Press, they're already packing their bags from the National Security Council. And I say, great work, by the way. And while you're at it, why don't you pack up your desk back at your home agency too? Because you're not going to be there for very much longer either.
Even if you didn't support Trump, I mean, a lot of Democrats voted for Kamala Harris, Democrat voters, that is. You would hope that they still wish to see the nation thrive and prosper. And obviously you want a president to be surrounded by people who share his vision for the country to help initiate that agenda. You don't want people causing more gridlock and obstacles. So it's pretty ironic that you have people saying that they want people in government to thwart Trump, even though he had a very successful first term. Last question before we let you go. His first term was great. He wouldn't be here again if it weren't. But I think everybody feels that this term has the potential to be even better than the first term. What do you expect will be the most glaring difference in President Trump's second administration beginning in just a week from now?
You're already seeing it. It's going to be this personnel issue. There's already been talk, and there was so much talk of that the personnel issues were really the problem the first go around, that they were looking around for people who are actual populists, looking around for people who were actually believers in the America First agenda. And instead you got these corporatists, these technocrats, these globalists who would say, well, yeah, I'm a Republican, but, I support war overseas, or yeah, I'm Republican, but I'm not so against the open borders. I think we do need this amount of people coming in. And wait a minute. No. These are some of the big and major ticket items that President Trump and J.D. Vance, by the way, decided on up front. This was the campaign. I remember when J.D. Vance and my children were with him in the room in Milwaukee when he took that convention speech, and he said, we are not going to have a government that outsources things to cheap foreign labor anymore. We're not going to have a government that goes overseas in search of wars and adventure or lies and sends our children overseas to the front lines to die. Instead, we're going to have a government that actually works for the American people. And probably the most stunning moment of that was when his own family came out, this, the family that we all know from Hillbilly Elegy, the book and the movie, but here they were, right along with him, other than his dearly departed grandmother. But the fact that they were able to be on stage with him, President Trump says that he's fighting for the forgotten man and woman of the United States. And in this time around, I think he really is showing that, because he could have chose pretty much anybody he wanted in the party to be his running mate, but choosing J.D. Vance, taking a risk, taking a real gamble like that. Number one, it shows how he was able to be so successful in business by taking risks and swinging big and at capitalizing, not always, by the way, in his business career, but he always bounces back from that, and he's bounced back here. But when it does pay off, man, does it pay off big. And I see that with J.D. Vance. And so I think with this personality and personnel pick, we understand that personnel is policy. The people that you choose for these various positions, and this is all going to come out in the confirmation process, that, by the way, similar process that Kamala Harris did not conduct. So Pete Hegseth has already answered more questions than Kamala Harris ever did. He's subjected himself to more vetting than she ever did from her own party when they just threw out the votes of Joe Biden. But that's another story. Look, we need people that are on board with America first. We need people who believe in this. We need people who wake up and think, what can I do for my country? That's what I love to see. That's why I'm so excited about President Trump's administration. And these next couple years, and certainly the next 100 days, are going to be anything if not exciting.
Monday can't come soon enough. I've never seen this much anticipation for an inauguration, including his first one, which was exciting. This one seems to even beat that in terms of the enthusiasm. So I want to thank you for giving us your time today as we prepare to welcome back into office the now 47th President of the United States. Enjoy the inauguration. We'll talk soon.
God bless, man. Take care.
And to all of our listeners out there, be sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss any of AMAC's great content. I'm Matt Kane. Until next time.
The Association of Mature American Citizens is the conservative voice for Americans 50 and older. AMAC is fighting for the values that you hold dear. Join today. Together, we can write the course of America.